Hi, this is Megan Thompson, and today I'm going to be walking you through the fourth week of the school year for my Advanced Placement World History class. And during that week, we're going to look at Constantine's Rome, but also at the growth of religions throughout Europe and Asia overall. AP World History is a course that covers 10,000 years of history. It starts in 8000 BCE and goes to the present day. And so it really looks at the different parts of the world from a thematic view, and then teachers do essentially case studies that relate to the key concepts in the AP World curriculum to help students really fill in the knowledge base to support those big thematic ideas. So while spending a week on the Council of Nicaea would be overrepresenting it in the broad scheme of history, we can use it as a case study in this week as something that we look a little bit more closely at to help us understand the conflicts that exist not only between different religions, but within religions as well. The resources that we use in AP World History are primarily these two: Ways of the World, which is our textbook, and Thinking Through Sources, which is the primary source guide that goes along with it. Students read one of the 23 chapters every week, and then every second class of the week, we're on a block schedule. So for some students, that's Tuesday, and for some, it's on Wednesday. They complete Thinking Through Sources activities, which are primary source based. They have text, they have images, whether it's editorial cartoons or paintings or sketches, that students analyze not only for content, but to help them build a larger argument. This is the core of what they do in AP World. All of the multiple choice questions on the AP World exam are stimulus based. They have some sort of a source that the questions are referring to, mostly primary, but some secondary sources as well. The essays that they do, one of the essays is a document-based question, and so in that one they are given 7 different sources that they have to use to build an argument. So what we're going to be doing this week as we work towards our discussion on the Council of Nicaea is really going to help to reinforce those different skills. All of this really prepares students for the AP exam. As you can see here, AP World is usually in the second week of the exam. On Thursday, May 16th is when it will be next year. Most of my students are taking the English language and composition exam the day before that, so they have a pretty intense week. These are juniors, so those courses typically pair with one another. In order to prepare for this exam, we do cover a chapter a week, and it is from a college level textbooks. Students are reading and taking notes on their own, and they can use those notes on quizzes and the activities that we'll be talking about a little bit later. The historical thinking skills that the College Board has indicated are at the core of the AP World History course are analyzing historical evidence and developing arguments. Analyzing historical evidence is really assessed on the multiple choice, and argument development is assessed in all of their essays. The activities that we're going to be doing in the week that I'm showing you here are definitely combining both of these, where they are reading and evaluating primary sources to determine which are the best to use to develop their argument, or at least explain their position. We're doing less convincing in this discussion than we were in the simulation that was done in 501, but we still see the idea of pulling evidence to support a particular argument. Everything that we do has to relate back to content standards. So the AP standards, like I said, are fairly broad. So the fact that one of its key concepts specifically mentions Emperor Constantine is pretty impressive and really does lend credibility to doing the case study on the Council of Nicaea this week. There are very few individuals that are mentioned in the curriculum because it would just be too many to try and cover over the course of the entire class. So anyone who is in there, we can tell is a fairly heavy hitter. The Minnesota state standards are grouped by age level, so we can see, because it starts with a 9 here, that tells us that it is for high schoolers, 9 through 12. At our school, both AP and regular world history are offered to juniors, so for most students, this is going to be a standard that they're tackling in 11th grade, and they have to demonstrate proficiency in that standard in order to graduate. So both the advanced placement and the Minnesota state standards really help us to build our curriculum, because it's telling us what's going to be assessed on the AP exam and potentially earn students college credit if they get a 3, 4, or 5 on the exam, or what their expectations are for graduation. So I'm going to be walking you through a typical week in our AP class, and specifically this would be week 4 because that's when Christianity is presented in our textbook. And this chapter covers ancient Greece, Rome, and Persia to give you an idea of how much content and how many big important aspects of history are covered within a single chapter. Part of the reason for that is there's an AP European history course that is very distinct from AP World. And AP World needs to make sure not to overrepresent Europe. And if each one of those civilizations were given a different chapter unto themselves, that would dramatically overrepresent Europe. So that's also part of the reason why this week we'll be comparing Christianity to some of the other religions that are around the world at this point, in order to make sure, again, that we're not overrepresenting Europe. So every week on day 1, they begin with their quiz that they've been reading for in the previous week and taking notes about. They complete a thematic graphic organizer, and they're going to be doing a reading and watching a video in order to help them to do that. So A History of the Roman People is a textbook that's actually from my time at the University of Iowa, where I was a history major and I took a course on ancient Rome. And this was one of the textbooks that we used for that. And it's got a nice chapter about Constantine that addresses not only the religious aspects that we covered in the Council of Nicaea, but other major issues that are addressed in the AP themes that I'll show you in a moment. Extra History is a YouTube series created by an organization called Extra Credit, and every week they release a history video that fits among one of their themes. The Woes of Constantine is from a season that is all about schisms within Christianity, and so they can watch and read in order to fill out their graphic organizer. That graphic organizer is going to be what starts the class the next day. They're going to essentially brainstorm some answers to the big themes and create an answer garden. And again, I'll show you in a moment what an answer garden looks like. Then I'll assign them the Council of Nicaea discussion and give them their roles. The roles are going to be the same that we used in our simulation. They're going to use the very brief descriptions that are at the back of the game book for that. And really their job is going to be to research primary sources that are going to help to support their views on different aspects of Christian theology at this point. On Thursday, they're going to take a look at Thinking Through Sources, that second green book that I showed you earlier. And specifically, the theme for this week is The Good Life in Asia, and it looks at Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Christianity and their standards for what it is to both lead a good life and have a good life. So that's making sure that we hit these other cultures as well. They'll continue to work on researching their roles. They can collect a lot of those quotations so that they have them ready to go when we do our discussion on day 4, so they can literally copy and paste them into the discussion. If they finish early, they always have their Chromebooks and their headphones ready so they can watch an episode of Crash Course, which is an online video series of episodes that are about 15 minutes long, hosted by John Green, who they love because he writes some of their favorite young adult novels and does a really great job of engaging them. He actually produces it with his former high school history teacher. And then day 4 is where it all comes together in our Council of Nicaea back channel chat. And again, I'll show you exactly what that looks like in a minute. So the thematic diagram that I mentioned revolves around the 5 themes of AP World History. We call these our SPICE themes. So you'll see they are social, political, interactions between humans and the environment, cultural, and economic. So that's how we get SPICE. And students see these graphic organizers, I would say, if not once a week, once every other week. And sometimes they are about big ideas, big parts of the world, and sometimes they're very specific. This week it will be Constantine's Rome. And so as they're reading and watching videos, they're just going to be putting notes in the bubbles or right outside them of facts that they find that fit into each one of these categories. So obviously we're going to be focusing on cultural this week with the Council of Nicaea, but we want to put it in a broader context as well. And the College Board, of course, gives us some specific examples of things that fall under each one of those themes. So especially towards the beginning of the course, as students are trying to figure out exactly what everything means, they can use this essentially as their cheat sheet of, okay, it's talking all about people getting sick from the plague, so which one does that fall into? Okay, I see demography and disease here. We see religion falls under the cultural label, and so they will be looking very closely at that with the Council of Nicaea, but these other labels help to really round out the picture of what life is like in Constantine's Rome. The second day, after they've completed that annotated diagram, they are going to help the class create an answer garden. So this is answergarden.ch, and then the number that comes after that is the specific answer garden that I created. And basically the way I create it is by inserting a question. So I asked, how would you describe the politics of Constantine's Rome? So I chose one of these specific themes, and I would have 4 other answer gardens for the other themes as well. What I like about answer gardens is that you have 20 characters as a maximum that you can use for your answer. So in the same way that writing haikus or tweets can be a good way for students to practice summarizing information, this really forces them to explain things in ways that are very simplistic, use vocabulary, and be very concise with what it is that they're doing. And so as students type in their answers, they start to populate or grow in this answer garden. So it's really easy to create, and also as it's being created, the instructor can click and X things out. So if you do have a student that happened to put something inappropriate there, you would be able to get that out pretty quickly. The discussion that they're going to be working towards has a generic rubric that we use for all of our discussions, and it works really well at setting up expectations so that as students are preparing, they know exactly what it is that they need to do. So the primary skills that we're looking at are pulling specific examples, not only from their primary and secondary sources, but also connecting it to other things that we're learning about. So in this discussion, yes, we're talking about the Council of Nicaea, but I would love to see students bringing in ideas from Buddhism and Hinduism and Confucianism and making connections between those. That would be really fantastic to see. So the first row is obviously what's worth the most points because they're pulling specific examples. And this is where they're probably going to have textual references that they can have saved in advance. They can also bring outside pieces of evidence from Buddhism, Hinduism, like I was mentioning earlier. Bringing in personal opinions, they're not able to get as many points from that, but we do like to make those personal connections. And they are really leading the discussion by asking questions. I might start them off with a question, but ideally they are really going to be fueling the discussion, and they know that one good question is worth 2 points, so they are good about doing that. This next row we call active listening, basically paying attention to one another and responding in a respectful way. And then they have a couple of categories that can lose them points just to remind them to stay academic even when they are in character, and even though they might have enemies that have been assigned in the room, that they still need to be respectful. So the discussion itself is going to be on a website called Back Channel Chat. And I use this rather than verbal discussions because, as I mentioned in my research for my literature review and simulations, extroverts tend to talk 4 times more than introverts in verbal discussions, regardless of if they know more or not. And I don't want my students' grades to be reflected on how outgoing they are. I want it to be reflected on how much they know. So back channel chats allow them to type in their answers, to copy and paste things if they have them prepared in advance, and to interact with one another in a much less threatening environment. So I'm signed in as Constantine. You can see over here that it is lit up green because I'm the instructor, and so it's always going to show that. And then I have another student in just as a sample to show you how they would log in as the name of their particular character. And so this allows that conversation to really flow through. Again, I can X out if they've said something inappropriate that's in there. At the end, I am able to go into settings and find data that tells me how many times they contributed, as well as to print out a transcript. So I don't need to be grading as I go. I can really just supervise the discussion and make sure that students are on task and answer questions if they have them. And then afterwards, I can download that transcript and really show them. And it's a great way to have the conversation with the student to say, here's why you got the grade that you did. Let's look at this transcript. Let's look at the quality of your questions compared to what other students had asked. So this is where the whole week is going to come together in that Council of Nicaea discussion to really demonstrate their understanding of what Rome is like under Constantine and their understanding of those primary and secondary sources that they can pull from biblical texts, that they can pull from Athanasius, that they can pull from Eusebius, or anywhere else that they have found resources that support some of those ideas. So the simulation really gave me the idea of how I could have each student come in with a particular perspective and represent that within the class and still do a lot of research to support their main ideas.